Listen, you getting average grades despite studying extremely hard for exams is only one person's fault, yours, because you keep doing the same exact thing every year. Studying more and more, putting in more hours despite really learning anything. And I know, because I did the exact same BS. I failed exams, I didn't get into med school the first time, and I spent my entire school life just studying. So how did I get to where I am now? A year away from becoming a doctor, inshallah. One of 8 people and the only international person that got into med school, beating thousands, scoring in the top percentiles nearly every year since, and now someone who teaches 80,000 people how to do the same thing. The reason is simple. At each stage, every time the exam got harder, I pushed myself to get faster and better at learning. I took the way I studied back to zero each time. I humbled myself and I rebuilt my entire system from scratch. And so in this video, I'm going to share with you the 3 biggest stages of learning smarter that I went through over the last 7 years. The full roadmap that you can follow, every big step I took that took me from studying 10, 12 hours a day in school that I used to do to now being in my final year of med school and only studying 30 minutes, an hour a week and scoring higher than ever. It all started at the ripe age of 16. No, definitely not. Let me paint the picture. It was my year 10 exams. I was doing very well on paper, one of the typical non-athletic smart kids of the class. I got good grades, but the truth was, it was all fake. Because every weekend, every evening, I was studying like a crazy guy, spending hours and hours just making notes, so many notes. I filled out entire booklets of ditto copy text from the books and the PowerPoints, convincing myself this is how I learn. Everyone does this, right? Writing the information down helps me study. I just have to push through it and put the work in and it'll pay off. And then finally, all of them were made. I made all my notes. I went through all the topics. It took me so long. And I looked at the clock, looked at my date, and realized there were only 2 days left before the actual exam. It was honestly like a gut punch. I'd spent weeks making these notes and I'd done nothing else. And now there were only 2 days left, which means I couldn't even finish reading through them all before the exam. I don't know how I was so oblivious. It was panic like I'd never felt before. And then honestly, I think that just flipped the switch. I grabbed the past papers of the exam and started combing through them, trying to figure out what is actually going to be coming up on this exam. What would I actually need to know? Because I don't have enough time to go through all the topics now. So I need to find the most important stuff that comes up the most. And to my surprise, in 10 minutes of looking through the papers, I found patterns. There were 3 to 4 topics that came up way more than the other ones did. So in the 2 days before the exams, I properly studied only those main topics and skimmed through the rest. And guess what? I ended up acing that exam somehow. And then I did the same thing in my final MYP GCSE papers. I dished the notes. And while everyone else was trying to cover the whole syllabus, every single thing they need to know, me, in the last few weeks, I mapped out exactly how each exam was structured. Figured out the high yield topics, paper by paper, subject by subject. And only studied and memorized exactly what gave me the most marks. And how did I find out about that? I went and studied directly from the mark schemes. And ended up walking away with one of the highest MYP scores in the UAE and Pakistan in 2016. I know. Insane. That was the first big barrier that I broke. That is the level that most of you watching are stuck at. So again, number 1, stop being a note-taking baboon. It is a time waste. You do not learn anything from copying words from a page with no aim. And number 2, analyze your exam papers first and build your entire studying strategy around that analysis. Your exam board is spelling out for you the content you have to revise, how much to revise for each topic, what type of information you actually need to know, memorize, understand, and all it takes is 2 to 3 hours of a bit of effortful work. I studied like half of what I would usually do in that year in those final GCSE MYP exams. Instead, what was I doing? I was doing TEDx talks, I was doing model UNs, and I was then binging like 9 or 10 DC Marvel shows. And I was able to do all of those other extracurriculars and activities and have fun because I did those 2 things. Because for the first time ever, I taught myself how to learn smart. And that continued to work over the next few years. I created more questions instead of the notes and I tested myself on them. That was my method. And I ended up ranking in the top 1% of my year at uni. I got into med school. My confidence was through the roof. And then came the workload of medicine. It wasn't bad to start with, to be honest, but it kept on piling up, increasing in volume every week. And before I knew it, I was somehow just 2 weeks before the exams and I'd barely done anything. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I lost track of the time, but I fully panicked and I was like, okay, I can't actually actually afford to actively study and make all the questions and do that. I just need to just go through all the content and read everything. I don't have time for anything else. And that is what students stuck at stage 2 do. You stop the note taking, you start thinking a bit more strategically about the exams, but how do you actually study? I know, you're rereading your pages, you're spamming your flashcards and questions without having actually any idea for how to understand it. All you know is learning from repetition. And I got away with it as well until that point, because now I was doing medicine, I was working jobs, I was doing YouTube, and I somehow only started studying 2 weeks before the exams like a dumbass. So of course it backfired in my face. I screwed up the exam. And it wasn't some like aha moment, oh, this is what I did wrong, this is what I did right. I knew what I had done wrong. I was literally staring at the grade boundaries, thinking I could have nearly failed the first year after working so hard to get in. And so instead of loitering around, being sad, I didn't waste any time. I reflected on how I studied, figured out what I did wrong, tore my study system to scratch, and started again. I knew my understanding was the issue, but I didn't just want to spend all my time reading through the pages and the books and stuff to understand, because that doesn't help unless you do it like 7 times. So I asked myself, what actually helps me understand when I'm learning something for the first time? And I remember I made a list of things, but the main 3 things that I took forward that I remember being on there were: number 1, skimming through the information before I jump in and read the chapter. Number 2, looking at the learning objectives of the slides before I jump into the PowerPoint. And number 3, watching like basic visual videos of the diseases before I learned them. All of this stuff was things I was doing before I properly studied. Which made sense. Doing the basics of the topics first helps you take in those medium level concepts a lot easier, right? But that gave me an idea. If the basics help me understand like the next level of detail in that topic, what if understanding just the medium level stuff also would help me understand the hard level stuff? If I only took in the basics and then only took in the medium level concepts and then only then did the harder details, wouldn't I technically understand the content a lot easier without getting stuck as much? And that was a realization. It's never about understanding all of the information then and there. It's about the order of the information you take in. It felt like a light bulb moment. Like, how does our brain actually do it? Because you just think, oh, you'll read it a few times and get it, right? No. Why can I not understand the first time I read through something? It's because we need a foundation of information to learn the next level of it, to understand the harder stuff. That is how our brain encodes. It needs to attach a new piece of information to an older piece of information. And yes, you can understand what encoding is, but the best way to do it is through this process of layering. And so I started doing it. When I would go through a topic, I would split it into 3 passes of reading through it. Where the first pass was me just looking at the headings, the subheadings, and seeing how this chapter was split up. Skimming through just the definitions maybe, and only spending 5 minutes on the whole, 10-page chapter. Then the second pass, I would dive a bit deeper. I would maybe start reading a bit of the paragraphs that looked important, that explained the general concepts of the diseases. That was probably the longest pass. And then only in the third pass would I go through the details, the specific investigations, the things that I had to memorize, the molecules, the different diseases, like the species of bacteria and all that crap. And the more I did this, the easier it got to understand. Information was suddenly just clicking the first time I was reading it. And it took some practice, honestly, but within weeks, that transformation was insane. I could pick up a chapter very confidently, very easily read it in those passes and understand it the first time I was going through it. What used to take hours of rereading with nothing going in now was taking a mere few minutes. Studying that easily felt unfair, but it was only because I was literally handing only the information to my brain that it could easily take in. But let's say the topics that you're studying are a bit too complex. The second big thing that you can do, even though it's a bit counterintuitive, is to go deeper and ask more questions while you're studying those harder concepts to feed the curiosity you have. Because if you feed that, you will learn it better and you will remember it for longer. And it's just a few minutes of work. And to study something in detail, people just go on Google or ChatGPT, but don't do that. Go use actual scientific based search engines like Consensus AI, because they actually use the data and the conclusions that they extract from millions of research studies that have been done properly. I'd honestly recommend incorporating that detailed research study into a few of the difficult concepts that you're studying, especially for medical students and STEM subject students. Because yes, studying smart helps, but when you take a few minutes out to just research a bit deeper, study it properly, you'll gain a lot more interest in what you're actually studying, and that interest is invaluable because it directly translates into how much longer you'll actually remember what you just did. And honestly, the way you use it is quite simple. For example, type out a complicated concept or a comparative question like this, and boom, you get the answers, the exact answers from all the studies, including the data collected, the full conclusions. This is what the top research in the world says regarding this specific topic that I was studying last week. This is the why that your teachers didn't really explain. They've even launched something called Deep Search, which I use for the literature search of my actual research paper that I'm publishing. Because what it does, it breaks down a single question that you ask into 20 plus targeted sub-searches, analyzes every paper, and then creates a full report with the visuals that map the entire landscape of the topic. Honestly, it's insane. I've never seen anything like this. I've introduced consensus to so many of my friends that are doing research as well, and they've all been astounded by how levels ahead this search engine is compared to the others. So if you're curious and want to experience this tool for yourself, check out the link in my description. You get a full month off of the premium subscription, and you can do as much research on it, as much studying on it till your heart is content. Again, for free, link in my description. But for now, let's get back to the final stage, that final hurdle that leveled up my studying multitudes beyond anything ever had. And so that is what I'd recommend you do. Read only in those pauses. I've made plenty live videos on how to do this layering, how to read in those pauses where I live show you how to do it. Just check those out, please. And this layering thing changed the game. It worked for years in my preclinical. I understood things way faster. And then I hit my clinical years, my third year of med school, where I started to study not just for my exams, but I needed to study so I could remember it for the time that I'm a doctor. Where the amount I needed not just to study, but to actually remember nearly tripled. I remember this. I was exhausted. I was studying in the library at 10 p.m. I had half a script for a YouTube video yet to write, so behind with all of my studying. I had a ward round at 8 a.m. and I kept getting the same types of questions wrong again and again. I was getting nothing. I couldn't remember a basic cardiology topic that I studied 3 weeks ago. I should have known it. I understood it at the time. So why couldn't I remember it? And I remember feeling pissed. I felt real anger at myself for not being able to know this, despite being a study guru on YouTube with 3,000 subscribers at the time, 50 videos out. Was I a fraud? Was I dumb? No. The simple truth was that my system was just not going to work at the level that I was at with the amount I was managing and doing. I had to somehow, if I was going to be managing everything, working part-time jobs, doing YouTube, all of it, if I was going to keep on doing all of that, I had to somehow level up yet again to get faster and more effective. So I went back into research mode. Honestly, in my free time, on the toilet, on the transport, every single second that I got, I was in learning science. I was reading about it. I buried myself in memory studies and different videos online. I listened to books from Barbara Oakley, Tony Buzan, and Cal Newport, a bunch of different learning authors. And after a few weeks of that, I kept on seeing videos on mind mapping. At first, it felt like a time waste. It felt like another note-taking pretty diagram exercise. But when I was reading, one thing stuck with me. Your brain will only remember what it organizes. And that lined up with what I already knew about encoding and layering. And so you know what? I was like, let's just do it. Let's try mind mapping. It might be a waste of time, but let's do it. But that didn't mean that I drew mind maps where there was like a Pinterest image type vibe where there's something in the center and arrows jumping off of it. That's not what a mind map is. A mind map is a diagram that visually and intuitively connects the entire topic that you're studying on one page. Very visually. And at the time, the way I figured out how to do this was I wrote down the big key categories of the group. Then I linked the symptoms, the causes of the diseases, all of the stuff under those big categories. And then I would slowly start thinking about how, while I was studying, I was thinking about how my mind map would actually look, how things would be on there. How can I make things visual? What would I be drawing? And yes, honestly, it felt like hard work for a stupid drawing that I don't know if it would help me learn. And I was very clumsy at it and took time. But at one point while I was studying, from that first mind map that I was building, it just clicked. Because I realized while I was drawing this mind map out, the process of making it was forcing me to study smarter. Almost automatically. I was creating a base on there that linked multiple topics together. I was building out the details around it. I was working in layers, something I'd been doing for years. I had to connect the concepts from different diseases together. I had to compare between them. I had to visualize the whole topic. I had to make it so memorable that I could recall it later easily. And I was doing all of it while just trying to make this silly little drawing. Like, what? I never understood, and that had that many aha moments when I was trying to learn, as I did when I was making those mind maps. And the best part is, one of the very first ones I made, I can probably still push myself to recall 2.5 years later. It was one on shock, where there was a blood vessel that I drew in the middle, and different things were happening to that blood vessel, and it was connected to a heart. I remember I divided the shock up into, it was cardiogenic, I think it was hypovolemic, distributive. Oh my god. And the hypovolemic was divided up further into hemorrhagic or non-hemorrhagic, because it's basically either when it's you losing enough fluid in your body. It's you losing fluid. So either you lose it internally through bleeding or whatever, or you are vomiting it all out, for example. And then cardiogenic was when it affects the heart, obviously. So and that causes shock. So that was either MI or obstructive. Yeah, I think those were the two types. And then distributive was divided up where my vessel was a bit bigger because other things around it is affecting the vessel and causing the shock. I think that's how it works. I can't remember, to be honest. Septic shock, neurogenic shock, and there was one other. But like, you understand what I mean, right? Like, I've recalled the entire chapter just by talking to you about it for less than 30 seconds. So if I actually thought about what my mind map looked like, imagine how well I must have had to understand the topic the first time in order to lay it out on the page. But not only just that, but remember it years later. Like, as I'm speaking to you, by the way, more and more is coming back in my head because I'm kind of grabbing onto those parts of my memory, and the mind map is slowly forming again. Like, see, how does that happen? I've not studied this topic honestly in 2.5 years, like properly. And I just remembered all the basics easily just by remembering how my brain linked it all on the page. And so I started making these mind maps for a lot of different hard topics I had this year, and they weren't the best. At the start, honestly, these mind maps were very mid. They were filled with information. They weren't colorful. They weren't super memorable. And some of them I didn't actually remember. And I started doing the mind map with all of my hard topics. I wish I did them with more so I would have stronger basis for all of them. But regardless, I saw a huge jump in my grades, and all I did was basically a few hours of work per week. And I did super well in med school. And I kept on doing well in med school exams throughout this entire time. Just because learning with mind maps is actually that efficient. I even started making videos on it. Thousands of people have live watched me make them on YouTube with full explanations as I'm making them in front of you. And so I've refined the method and improved it so much over these last 2.5 years, to the extent where I've now been coaching people how to use it for their own hyper-competitive exams, accounting, law school, different sciences, all of them. And most of these people are actually succeeding better than they ever have before. That is why I am so confident, and I so bullishly say that the process of creating mind maps is the fastest and most effective way to learn anything, because it makes this entire process of studying automatic. You get to do all of the learning smart activities and all the things that you should be doing in this process of just making that mind map. And by the way, if you're sold on the fact that you need to make these mind maps and learn this skill, I have a full guide on my entire pro mind mapping method. It includes every single step, diagrams, frequently asked questions. All you have to do is click the link in the description below, enter your email, and it will be directly delivered to your inbox in a few minutes. All of it, by the way, completely for free, because I just want you guys to learn this. I am making a paid course on this as well. It's in progress right now. And I also have plenty live videos on how to do the mind mapping, where I literally show people exactly every single step as I'm doing it for my own subject and other subjects as well. I'll link it all in the description. But anyway, those were the 3 big stages of learning smarter that I went through over the last 7 years. The big transformational steps of my life that I went through as a student that took me from studying too many hours a day in school, in uni, and getting mediocre grades to now studying very little and alhamdulillah, doing very well. You now have the entire roadmap that I took. So the question is, what will you do about it? Drop any questions you have in the comments below, and also reply with new comments if you want to get me to see something urgently, because I don't get notifications for like the follow-ups. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, I don't know what you're waiting for, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.